As you guys are going through your NASM certification, it's obvious that you're not trying to become a dietitian or a nutritionist, but how much do you need to know? Not only how much do you need to know to pass your NASM certification, but also like what's gonna be most relevant when it comes to working with coaches and clients. So in this video, we're gonna break those things down, and I'm also gonna go a little bit deeper for you guys to make sure you guys understand one of the main concepts of macronutrients in context to what you need to know for the exam. So let's jump right in. First off, NASM nutrition, the one thing that sticks out, one thing that hangs a lot of people up when they get into this chapter, or really when you get into nutrition, you start having conversations in the personal training world, is this understanding of scope of practice. Really meaning like, where do we operate in the world of nutrition? So NASM does a good job inside of some of the chapter of giving you guys some context to registered dietitians, certified nutritionists, personal trainers, what it really means to be each one of those. And obviously there are massively varying levels of education, experience, and requirements that are involved there. But the good thing for you guys is that I think if you're operating from a coaching perspective, helping people make better decisions in their lives, you don't need to be fearful here. Right? You get on some of the Facebook groups that are out there, even like our Facebook group, which you guys can find the link for if you're not in there already, and people are scared to give nutrition. It's like, hey, we're not a dietitian, I can't talk about nutrition at all. But let's be honest, when clients come in, that first session you guys sit down and talk, chances are one of the questions they're gonna have is gonna be something about nutrition. So I truly believe if you're gonna succeed in this industry, you need to be a resource for your clients. But the great thing about being a resource is that doesn't mean you gotta do it all for them. It doesn't mean you need to give them a meal plan. And truthfully, that might not be what they really need in the end anyway. So definitely pay attention to. I'm not gonna go super deep on every detail, but make sure you guys have a good understanding of scope of practice. And especially in here, use a little bit of common sense. If it comes to working with anybody who you might consider to be a special population or someone who has medically different dietary needs, someone who's a diabetic, high blood pressure, anything like that at all, it's gonna wanna be one of the opportunities for us to refer out. And the cool part of that too is if you really start to look at scope of practice, not from a fear-based approach, but from an abundance and working together and what's best for the client, then it gives you a lot of reason of wanting to develop relationships in your local community with dietitians and nutritionists. It's gonna be a little bit different state to state, but find those people and start to build relationships with them. And build relationships not by asking for business right away, but by trying to send people there, because they're gonna have a ton of respect for that. And I've also found that, you know what, you can only be an expert in so many areas. Are you gonna be an expert in nutrition? Are you gonna be an expert in training? Obviously over time, you can become pretty proficient in both, but I truly believe that you can only be world-class in one. And so for me, making that decision to be world-class with training and physiology in the gym and connecting with other great nutrition practitioners, it's only gotten my clients better results. They've got more people in their world that are looking after them. And in the end, they refer clients your way as well. So make sure you guys just pay attention to scope of practice. Don't be fearful, but understand what it is and understand what we should not be doing as coaches and trainers. But also know, people are gonna want help and you need to be a resource for them in some aspect. Another one here, this isn't written in this exact way in your guys' materials. You're like, I don't know, he's got a lot of letters and equations on here. I didn't sign up for this, it's not calculus. But this is covered in a different way in the material. They talk about total daily energy expenditure. Because as we're looking at nutrition, really the main focus here in this chapter, and especially for us as trainers, is understanding how is the body utilizing macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, turning it into fuel, and how is that related to what we do with exercise and the needs for our clients based upon what their goals might be. So a big part of that concept is understanding total daily energy expenditure. I put it on here, TDEE for short, right? This encompasses in everything that's going on in our day in our body, how many calories we burn, all right? Simple way of looking at it. Think of it as like a big pie. And then from that, it's broken up into these different sections. One of those, RMR, resting metabolic rate. Right? That would be if I was lying on the ground. Wouldn't that be nice? If I was lying on the ground for 24 hours and just doing nothing, how much energy would my body require? And that's a big one. That's actually the biggest component for most people. This is actually one of the benefits, I think, of doing body composition testing and understanding some of these things, because you'll find even someone like myself, you know, I weigh about 165 pounds, somewhere around like, 13, 14% body fat. My RMR, it's an estimate, but it's probably somewhere around 14 to 1500 calories. That means for basic function of my internal processes, that's what I need. All right, so this one can be pretty helpful when it comes to teaching your clients about nutrition. And that's what a lot of it is education and bringing people along. Resting metabolic rate plus TEF, the thermic effect of food. Kind of sounds like a funky term, but it's just the fact that it actually costs our body energy to break down carbs, proteins, and fats. And as you guys see in the chapter, certain macros like protein per gram actually require more energy. We've got to do more work to break it down and turn it into ATP. So that's the thermic effect of food. And funny enough, even as you get into fat loss strategies and looking at macronutrients at a higher level, this can be something that plays a big role. Eating a slightly higher protein diet, not because you need more recovery or repair, but because it actually slightly increases our total daily energy expenditure through the thermic effect of food. So a very cool concept, but it does play a role and it's impactful. The next one, this could be encapsulated neat and eat. This is really just activity in our day. I like to separate it into two. One of those is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. That just means outside of the gym, how much do you move, right? Are you seated at a desk all day? Not a lot of neat. It's not very neat, right? Not great for your body. You're not expending a lot of energy. Versus like I'm a UPS driver, I'm up, I'm moving things. That's gonna have a big impact. And even as you guys get into the recommendations we have for you on resources, you'll see places like Precision Nutrition, when they're doing their calculations for macros and calories, they take a lot of this into account, right? It's not an exact science, but at least it gives us somewhere to start. So non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and then eat. That's the gym, right? Or whatever you might do. Exercise, activity, thermogenesis. All right, so there's a lot to unpack here for you guys to spend time understanding, but I think this is a pivotal concept, not only for your exam, but truthfully, just foundation of nutrition and understanding bioenergetics, previous chapters as well. Total daily energy expenditure equals resting metabolic rate, plus the thermic effect of food, plus non-exercise activity thermogenesis, NEAT, and then eat. Exercise activity thermogenesis. All right, so cool. We could probably do a whole video just on that, but we'll move on. All right, what I'm gonna go through on the opposite side of this board for you guys, because I think it's valuable, and this is probably the more detailed information that you guys might not only be interested in, that your clients might need to learn and know more about, but also you just gotta know. That's gonna be understanding your macros, your macronutrients, what they are, what the purpose of each of them are, right? Some of them have more roles in the body than others. How does that relate to calories, energy expenditure, all those things? So we're gonna cover that. You wanna spend time making sure you know macros. Doesn't mean you have to know how to count macros. That's not the goal of this chapter, nor is it necessarily your role as we're getting into it, but we wanna know. And then I have on here, actually I forgot to put my question mark, so we're going live right now, boom. Digestion, micronutrients, hydration, these are different pieces. Even digestion's included in an earlier chapter, and there's little pieces about it on the macronutrients that are in your chapter. I'm not gonna say it's not important, right? Because somebody who loves nutrition is gonna like leave a bad comment on this video. It's fine, you can do it. But just means that it's not that important for your exam, right? Because as we look at, this whole chapter is part of like 5 chapters that encompasses 15 questions. So just statistically, guys, you're gonna get like 3 questions from this chapter. So keep that in mind as we're studying. I want to keep you focused on the right stuff. You can learn more about digestion as you go along. And the truth is I can tell you very rarely has this come into play in my 16 years of training in the gym. It might not even be inside of our scope of practice, but either way, review it, don't study it a ton. And then same with micronutrients and hydration. They are important, knowing what a vitamin is, knowing the difference between that and minerals, but don't spend nearly as much time on these as you do on some of these others. So let's go ahead and jump right into macros. So our macronutrients, as you guys read through the chapter, there's actually 4 things that are mentioned when we kind of start to talk about the conversation of macros or macronutrients. And the one that's missing from here is alcohol, right? And that's mostly because it's not truly a macro when it comes to how we utilize this and break things down for ATP. It's not really a primary fuel source. And so we're gonna stay focused primarily on proteins, carbs, and fats. And there's some numbers that I didn't write up on here because hopefully you can kind of be testing yourself as we're going through it as well. But one thing you definitely need to know, very basic, is understanding the calories per gram that are associated, right? Calories or kilocalories, this just is like a unit of energy. So essentially, if we wanted to get into the science of it, how would they find out how many calories in a gram of each of these things, or even in food, is literally, it's like if I were to burn it, right? Like how much energy would it put off? So when it comes to understanding carbs, proteins, fats, and thinking about calories, It's a tough conversation. People start to think about calories and they automatically have a bad connotation or maybe a negative experience, like calories and calorie counting, just a unit of energy. And so when we look at the macros, all three of them are vitally important, right? And that's what we want to instill in our clients as well, is we want them to have a healthy relationship with all three, but we do want them to have an understanding of all three as well. And it just comes down to energy density. Right? This is where, unfortunately, our friend over here, fats, lipids, for example, gets demonized because how many calories per gram? 9. 9 calories per gram when it comes to our fats and our lipids. So again, it's not bad, it's actually good. It means it's a very dense fuel source, right? Even if you look at fat storage on the body, most of us have enough energy to survive for weeks because fat is such an efficient fuel source, all right? So not a bad thing, but 9 calories per gram for fat. And this will play a role, obviously, as we talk about macronutrient calculating and calories, because it does play a role. Carbohydrates and protein, pretty easy to remember both of those. We got 4, all right? 4, so this just means that from an energy density standpoint, they're both relatively equivalent. What we'll look at and we'll find though is like one is probably a better fuel source. Like one of them we want to consume more for energy. The other one maybe more for processes. So let's go ahead and let's start out with our first one here, protein. You gotta get more protein, right? Probably one of the #1 things people are gonna ask you about when they start strength training with you. You're like, Joe, what kind of protein supplements you take, bro? Or like, how much protein after my workout? And I love those questions. I've been at the airport security before, and mostly because I'm crazy and I travel with stuff. And they're like, yeah, how much protein do you have every day? I'm like, I don't know, I haven't counted for years. But I love it. Either way, the population at large is aware of protein, even if they're over-marketed on it. Either way, protein has important processes in the body. And when we think about protein, a lot of times we think about muscle repair and recovery or building muscle. That is one of many functions. Truthfully, if you look at it, we're made of proteins. Like we are made of amino acids. They also play important roles for chemical messengers in the body, hormone all kinds of things that protein play a role for. And the reason that I say that is because you need to be taking in an adequate amount of protein for basic function and health. So oftentimes, this isn't usually the macronutrient that people try to get rid of, tends to be one of the others, but we need this for basic processes, right? Even as we look at our recommendations, and obviously based upon our goals, based upon our preferences, training experience, intensity, there's gonna be some variations in how much that we need, but either way, we need protein. We need to consume it. And inside the chapter, they talk about a couple concepts, and you need to know a little bit about, you don't need to know every single one, but they talk about essential versus non-essential amino acids. You don't need to memorize each of those, but what you do need to know is that essential amino acids, essential, we have to eat them. We gotta take them in, right? You gotta consume them for basic health and function, repair, recovery, for all of that. Non-essential amino acids, just like it sounds, non-essential, you don't have to eat it, your body can create it. And this comes into play even more so when we're talking about especially plant-based versus animal-based protein sources. Most of your, or all of your animal-based proteins are gonna be what we call complete proteins. That means that they contain all of the essentials. Like if you eat those as protein sources, you're gonna get what you need. And sometimes, for our vegans and our vegetarians, or those who might prefer more of those protein sources, you have to be a little bit more strategic because many of them are non-complete protein sources, meaning that individually they may be missing out on one or a few of the essential amino acids that you need for basic function. So you don't need to know all the essential non-essentials, but you do need to understand some information at that level. The other thing we want to keep in mind here is just having some basic understanding of our ranges. Not only because, guys, these are very common, easy test questions that might come up in the few you get from here, but also this kind of gives us an idea of like where this fits when it comes to intake for our clients, which we'll get to. 10% to 35%. You can really see, if we just want to look at the ranges as a whole, it's a pretty big variation there, right? And that's going to be dependent upon some of these other factors that we looked at. How active are they? What are their goals? All these things that go into it. The cool thing, if you want to kind of cheat code understanding macronutrients, especially if you want to provide great resources for your clients, what we've actually done is in the description for this video, you guys can check it out below, there are a couple of links. NASM does have a macronutrient calculator that does some of this for you based upon the person and goals, which is great. That's well within your scope of practice to teach someone how to use these things. Super cool tool. And I'll also say, although we get nothing from it either, from either one, I really like Precision Nutrition's macronutrient calculator. So this one's gonna take you a little bit of time, but follow the links below and play around with these. The cool part about both is they give you some outputs. The really cool part about the Precision Nutrition calculator is the detailed questions that go into coming up with this stuff, which I find are very empowering for clients. And actually, as you go through and do it, this is a cool thing you could do with a client and add a lot of value. It comes out with like a 14-page printout. But either way, I wanted to tell you guys that just to simplify figuring out where someone should go. And then you'll see in that portion of your chapter that talks about ranges and recommendations, you'll see 0.8 grams per kilogram all the way up to 2.4. That's huge. That's huge. I'm gonna cheat code the math for you. Kilograms is a 2.2 conversion to pounds. So let's say I weigh around 70 kilograms. 70 times 0.8, that's gonna put me relatively low on my protein, maybe somewhere 60 to 70 grams of protein for a day. Now the recommendation you find there in your chapter, pay attention to that because that's a tricky test question that comes up. That 0.8 grams per kilogram is a recommendation on the lower level for a sedentary person. It's probably not the recommendation you should be following. Probably not your client as well. So just keep that in mind. You'll find most recommendations are gonna be a little bit higher than that, right? If I weigh about 70 kilograms, even this higher end, that's gonna come out to be somewhere close to about a gram per pound, right? So for me, on that higher end, that means like 160 grams of protein. These are well within our normal ranges. And when it comes to scope of practice, guys, that's the thing you really wanna look at and follow, is what resources am I using to disseminate this information to my clients. The cool thing about using NASM or Precision Nutrition, these are well-researched resources and you're just helping to educate clients. So don't be afraid to lean into those, but you will find quite a few different ranges in here. Someone who's sedentary all the way up to someone who's really trying to gain muscle and is extremely active and might need more of that for their recovery and repair. So that's what you guys need to know about protein. Moving on to carbohydrates, carbs, right? I'm sure as you guys watch this video, there's probably been a time in your life where you're like, you know what, I'm gonna cut them out. I'm cutting carbs out altogether. And then all your friends stop talking to you. Life gets dark, right? It's tough, it's tough. But your body is dynamic. Your body can succeed in a lot of different ways. That's the cool part about nutrition. And carbohydrates, out of these three, we need protein and fat intake for basic function. Carbs, funny enough, your body can create them. There's a little term, gluconeogenesis. I'm not saying you're gonna be happy. I'm not saying you're gonna be strong and powerful. I'm not saying your friends are gonna wanna be around you, but you could survive without carbohydrates. Carbs truly only serve energy purposes. And they are one of the fastest things we can break down to get energy, especially when we're talking about gaining muscle. We're talking about fast twitch activities. We're talking about strength training, power, right? Carbohydrates are a primary fuel source there. And so that's why you'll see 45 to 65%, again, a relatively big range on this. Some of that is gonna be energy dependent, meaning how active is this person, as well as their goals. And then the cool thing about the Precision Nutrition calculator I mentioned, because they go through and do this, it's also preference, right? We'll find when it comes to losing weight, gaining weight, we're looking at total caloric intake. Usually protein, we need to stay around a certain range. A lot of places will put that around 30%. And then you really can start to play with carbs and fats. And you might be someone who just enjoys more carbohydrate foods, or maybe your client is. And so I really like that calculator because it empowers them to enjoy what they're doing with their food versus hating it. And that's super big long-term for most people. But 45 to 65% of their total energy or their total calories coming from carbs. And then that, just to translate that into grams, huge range, right? 3 grams per kilogram of body weight all the way up to 12. And a good table for you guys to actually look at, especially if you guys are studying the 7th edition as this video comes out right now, table 9-12. That one specifically will show you the ranges for carbohydrate recommendations and you'll see how big the difference can be. And this is gonna be more someone who's wildly active, endurance athlete, and they need that carbohydrate range versus someone who's relatively sedentary. So carbohydrates, energy dependent. I'm not gonna get into too much of the glycogen, glucose. There's a little bit in there about complex and simple, sugars and what that looks like. So make sure you guys know those things. Make sure you understand that glycogen is the storage form of carbohydrates in our liver and in our muscles. And if you know that, you're gonna be good. And then last but definitely not least, fats, lipids, phospholipids, monounsaturated, saturated. These are all the terms that you guys see in your material surrounding fat. And it is a very efficient fuel source, right? Even though I'm all excited, hyped up, talking to you guys on camera right now, primarily I'm at a low energy state. My body's burning a lot of fat for fuel. When it comes to intake, taking a certain amount of fat in doesn't have to be excessive, right? We're talking 20 to 35% of our calories coming from fats is vitally important, right? Things like hormone production. Essentially the fats are precursors to proper hormone production for men and for women, right? So there's an important element there. Obviously we get energy from that, that's one piece, but then also even vitamin absorption. We have fat soluble vitamins. That means in the absence of enough fat in our diet, you might not even absorb vitamins A, D, E, and K. So definitely as we go through this, one takeaway for you guys, as well as what we want to translate to clients, is that we don't really want to demonize or cut out any of them, but just understand when and why they might play a priority in our diet. And especially even as we start to look at many of our clients trying to lose weight, the chapter doesn't get too deep into this, but like hunger hormones, adiponectin, ghrelin, the macros play a very important role in that. Like having fat in your diet, a certain amount of fat and protein, especially for people, helps to signal those hormones that like, hey, I'm full, I'm satisfied. So no doubt we could go super deep on nutrition, which is why NASM created a nutrition certification. There's great programs out there like Precision Nutrition, but hopefully you guys have a better understanding of like, okay, for the NASM CPT, what level do I need to know? And we covered most of the major concepts in here, and just know that this is an ongoing area of growth. Definitely a great opportunity for you guys as you get in to start working with clients, and then you start to build your business. Maybe an opportunity for you to build in different services. Definitely an opportunity just to deliver better results for your clients as well. And a lot of it comes down to knowing the basic information and starting to figure out how do I disseminate it to my clients over time. And guys, we put a lot of energy into this free YouTube channel because we want more personal trainers like you guys to be successful in the industry. So do me a favor, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, like and maybe share this video so we can work with more coaches like you and get into the industry.